This week on Inside Scoop, President Trump's first step toward Middle East peace, the stirrings of renewal in America, and what's at stake in the new Supreme Court term. Welcome to Inside Scoop, where we talk about all the news that's fit to print in the Washington Examiner magazine. I'm Jim Antle, your host, and this week, a major diplomatic breakthrough in the Middle East. The hostages that have been held in captivity by Hamas, the terrorist organization, have all been freed, all surviving hostages, and this has been a pretty big victory for the international community at large and for the Trump administration in particular. President Trump, however, would like to see even more progress.
This is not only the end of a war, this is the end of an age of terror and death and the beginning of the age of faith and hope and of God. It's the start of a grand concord and lasting harmony for Israel and all the nations of what will soon be a truly magnificent region. I believe that so strongly. This is the historic dawn of a new Middle East.
This has been the biggest diplomatic victory of the second Trump term and possibly of his entire presidency. It certainly sets the stage for a substantial change in the Middle East. President Trump is already looking toward the next phase, the next stage of negotiations, which will deal with the future of Gaza, which he has promised that he may be open to visiting.
Would you ever visit Gaza?
I would, yeah, I would. I'd be proud to. I see it. I mean, I know it so well without visiting, but I do see it. Yeah, I would actually. I'd like to do it. I'd like to put my feet on it at least.
This becomes a really major factor in the future of American foreign policy because many administrations have wanted to pivot from the Middle East and have wanted to see a more peaceful Middle East. This has been a focus of multiple administrations for the past few decades. And that's why this is going to be very difficult. And it's this next phase that is going to be more challenging than ever because it deals with the political future of Gaza, who's going to be governing Gaza, the disarmament of Hamas, what happens to Hamas leaders, and then Israel's relations with its Arab neighbors, which was a major focus of President Trump during his first term in office. What we've seen so far is very promising, but obviously we've had a lot of disappointments diplomatically before. But even with the limited things that we've seen so far, Hamas saying that they're going to stop their campaign, releasing the hostages, Israel promising some sort of withdrawal from Gaza and the cessation of bombing and improvement of the humanitarian situation there. All of these things, even in and of themselves, as long as they hold, are a major historic accomplishment. And for that reason, the image of Secretary of State Marco Rubio interrupting President Trump in a meeting to tell him that all of these things were nearing fruition and that it was time to announce this on social media, this will be an iconic image that will go down in history alongside other similar events, such as when President Bush learned for the first time that the United States had been attacked on 9/11 when he was visiting a schoolhouse. And we have that image that is indelible and that we remember forever. Hopefully, this, given that it's much better news, will be an even more historically significant event. But there is so much more that's going to have to happen in terms of diplomacy, in terms of cooperation from Israel, Hamas, Iran, governments that are generally hostile to one another, and peoples that have historic grievances with one another that go back centuries. President Trump has positioned himself as a deal maker. His most famous book was titled The Art of the Deal. And in many respects, he has joked that this is sort of a real estate transaction. But to the people who live in these areas, it's obviously much more than that. And there's been so much blood and treasure spent in this region over the years. Can President Trump get this across the finish line? Will the peace hold? And will we see a new dawn of a new era in the Middle East? If you're following us on social media, comment down below and let us know what you think. And in this week's issue, we're going to be talking about the restoration of America. And this week I'm joined by Restoring America editor Jeremiah Poff. And Jeremiah, it's the 4th anniversary of when the Washington Examiner launched this Restoring America project. Could you talk us through a little bit about what that initiative is?
Yeah, so the Restoring America project is our kind of overarching, long-running discussion about what are the things that need to be done in our country to make the country a better place for everyone to live in, and a nation that we can be proud of. One of the things that we in the pundit business like to do is talk about all the problems, but this is our way of having a centered, solutions-oriented project, and that we've been pushing for the last 4 years.
So you've written a piece this week that's a cover story of the current issue, talking about whether we're in the beginnings of an American national renewal. Walk us through what that means.
Right. So when we launched this project 4 years ago, the country was in a very different place, culturally, economically, politically even. So, right, you had the Biden administration was in power. You had just gotten through the withdrawal from Afghanistan, which went horribly wrong. You had inflation going through the roof. Wokeness was at its peak, and they were in mask mandates were still in place over COVID, and people were getting fired for not getting the vaccine.
Sure.
So now things are a lot different, right? Practically everything that I just recounted has kind of been almost forgotten, in a certain sense, almost forgotten from
right.
Trump is in office now. You've got a much higher rate of people who say that the country's on the right track on the wrong track than did 4 years ago. It's still a minority, but it's a big enough change that you can see that there's a sense among the American public that there's something brewing that makes them feel optimistic, or at least a sense that there could be some optimism, something to be optimistic about in America right now. And so that's really the main theme of my piece, is to look back through those same principles that we outlined 4 years ago, and what's happened in the last 4 years. Are we doing better? And in a lot of cases we are, but there's still a lot of places where we see some elusive progress, and even some new things that have kind of raised new challenges to those same values that we want to push forward.
So a phrase that a lot of people use is the Overton window, and I think an important theme in your piece is that in some areas that Overton window has been shifted in a certain direction.
Right. Well, you think about what was going on in 2021, right? DEI, CRT, George Floyd, those were all like the ascendant cultural topics of the time, and the conservative view of equality, equal treatment, and no like affirmative action, that was kind of like way in retreat, and it seemed like the left's cultural project was dominant and was going to be dominant for a very long time. That's completely shifted, and in a large part is because of those overreaches that took place in that time. I think people were sick and tired of being told that they were racist at their corporate diversity trainings, and they were sick and tired of being told that if they didn't post a black square on Instagram that they were somehow racist, or that if they objected to the fact that kids in school were being given books with pornography in it, that they were somehow homophobic.
Right.
Though the reaction to that culturally said, we're done with this, we're done being lectured, we're done being pushed all around on this stuff. And now what it did is it pushed the Overton window way back to the right on that issue, just as you mentioned, and along with many other issues as well. But the retreat of wokeness is, I think, one of the real big issue where this is most obvious. We kind of wanted to recount how that happened and why. Is there a possibility this could come back down the road? It could be.
Sure.
But a lot of progress has been made in the last 4 years, I think, on this issue specifically.
I mean, even to the point where Democrats are discussing whether they should move beyond some of these things, even if it may not be a consensus within the party to do so. And certainly, Kamala Harris devoted a large part of her 2024 campaign, admittedly only 107 days, so maybe not that large, but a lot of her campaign sort of distancing herself from things that she'd said in 2019 and 2020.
Right, and that's like the Democrats, I think, are going to be weighed down by the anchor of the 2020 primary for a long time because of that very reason, is because what they thought they needed to say in 2020 is now a major liability today and could be going forward. Another issue that we talked about a little bit in the piece, the border, right? Immigration enforcement is another thing that the Democrats campaigned on in 2020 and governed from 2021 till 2024-ish. Open the border, let everyone in. We're not gonna have any strict vetting. We're just gonna be extra humanitarian. The people didn't really like that because it stressed their homes, it stressed their communities. And now they're in a position where the Democrats are now saying that, oh, well, maybe we messed up a little bit here. And again, so now they're talking about border security first now, to the point which was unheard of 4 years ago.
So even though your piece sort of strikes an optimistic tone, it's also cautious. It doesn't take for granted that all of these trends are going to continue forever. And obviously, when you look at the left and you look at the Democratic Party, some things that they do are inspired to simply be the opposite of whatever President Trump does. So if there are some positive things by our way of thinking that are happening under this administration, Democrats might resist it simply because they're in the resistance mode. Right,
and that's one of the things that I think is making the Trump administration so effective in the public is that they, their approval ratings are nowhere near as low as they were in the first term, and I think in large part because the Democrats are still in reflexive anti-Trump mode. But on the flip side is that Trump's only going to be in office until 2028 or 2029, right?
Right.
And we're a cyclical country. We have elections every 2 years. We have presidential elections every 4 years.
Right.
And what's true today, sense of optimism, this sense of, we're bringing America back to what it was supposed to be, in 4 or 5, 10 years could be in a very different place. We have to remember that the Overton window doesn't always shift in your direction.
Sure.
It shifts back to the other side. And that, I think that's a good lesson for Democrats, I think, learned that in the last election. But, the conservatives and Republicans should think about that going forward.
Something about the arc of history doesn't always bend and so forth.
That's right.
Thank you, Jeremiah. If you're watching us on YouTube, you can read Jeremiah's full article by clicking here in our digital magazine. The new Supreme Court term isn't just a docket of fresh cases, but a referendum on the MAGA mandate. President Trump has thrown down the gauntlet, pushing the limits of executive power against the court he helped build. Our Amy DeLaura lays out the top cases of the new term.
The Supreme Court term will decide tariffs that could reshape global trade, a bid to fire a Federal Reserve holdout, birthright citizenship, and then that's all before the cultural warriors descend on human sexuality, sports fairness, and election integrity. This month, the justices heard arguments in Childs v. Salazar, a Colorado clash where a Christian therapist's faith collides with the state's iron-fisted ban on conversion therapy. Kaylee Childs, a licensed counselor in Colorado Springs, built her practice on helping families navigate the turbulent waters of adolescence. But when a teenage client sought voluntary talk therapy to explore questions of sexual orientation and gender identity, questions rooted in the girl's own doubts, not some imposed agenda, Childs faced a stark choice: affirm the state's progressive script or risk her license. Colorado's 2019 law, a darling of the LGBT lobby, prohibits any licensed mental health provider from engaging in practices aimed at changing a minor's sexual orientation or gender identity. A win for Childs wouldn't just vindicate faith-based counseling, it could crack open doors for more faith-based advocacy nationwide, while also causing other states to reconsider their own conversion therapy bans. 2 cases challenge Republican-backed bans on biological males who identify or are transitioning to females from competing in women's athletics. But the real flashpoint is the plaintiff in West Virginia versus BPJ. A 12-year-old middle schooler named Becky Pepper Jackson, who transitioned at 8, was blocked from competing by West Virginia's 2021 Save Women's Sports Act, prompting a federal lawsuit. The NCAA counts fewer than 10 transgender collegiate athletes among 500,000, yet the bans ignite fury. Shifting from culture to commerce, November 5th brings Learning Resources, Inc. versus United States, a turbocharged tariff tussle that could make or break Trump's economic blitzkrieg. Trump invoked the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to slap 25% duties on $3 trillion in imports. Steel from China, cars from Mexico, and widgets from everywhere. A toy importer from Ohio sued, arguing that the IEEPA targets sanctions and seizures, not trade wars. The thorough line of most of the court's cases this term is presidential power, and no cape pulses with it like Trump versus Cook, which will be argued in January 2026. Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook, a Biden holdover, became Trump's piñata. Accused of mortgage fraud, Cook refused Trump's pleas for rate cuts, provoking Trump to move to oust her. The District of Columbia Circuit Court of Appeals blocked her removal, citing the Fed's uniquely structured independence. A Trump win would mean the central bank can bend to White House wins. A Trump loss would be a rare check on MAGA's administrative state purge. October 8th's Poff versus Illinois State Board of Election probes mail-in voting madness, as it challenges Illinois' rule to allow counting late-arriving ballots. A narrow ruling could tighten the 2026 midterm elections, curbing the Democratic edge in big states. Looming largest may be Trump's Day 1 decree ending birthright citizenship via executive order.
That's a good one. Birthright. That's a big one.
As Trump aims to end tourism babies or anchor babies. A Trump win would upend United States versus Wong Kim arc and would allow the president to further curb illegal immigration. As the gavel falls on these battles, the big picture sharpens. What does this term mean for Trump's presidency, the MAGA movement, and the court's complicated legacy? As the justices deliberate, one thing is clear: Trump's America demands a court with the courage to match his. And the nation will be watching. I'm Amy Delora for Washington Examiner.
Thank you, Amy. You could read that story and all the articles we talked about in today's show in our Washington Examiner magazine. This has been your Inside Scoop. I'm Jim Antle, your host. We'll catch you next time.